think this is going to be the session 5th, and we are going to talk about some very interesting stuff. So previously we talked about like the if condition and how we can use it like to like tell the computer like to whether do something or something else. So now we are trying to understand that there are more tools that we can use to make like our code simpler and cleaner. So first of all, we are going to talk about like inputs and how we can how like a user can provide inputs for the program. We will talk about like the for loops and while loops. So we are talking about loops in general, but there are usually 2 different kind of loops. So we have for loop and while loop. And then after that, we'll talk about like the different like examples that we can practice. So let's get started. So let's talk about the inputs, right? So if you remember, we have like a mouse is pressed thing that can detect whether you press a mouse or not. And if you remember, that was a Boolean, right? So it is true if you click the mouse, and it is false if you didn't, if you don't, right? So here I'm going just to write this example here on my end. If you already open like the Aranite on your end, feel free to do it yourself. It would be cool. So let me see here. So I have the size 500. Okay, so let's try it like this. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller and make this one a little bit wider. Okay, so we have this one, then we have draw, and then we have if mouse is pressed, right? In that case, create circle, mouse X, mouse Y 30, right? And if you remember, we had this like a thing before that if you put a background, the setup, it creates the background once, and then it tries to create the circle over it again and again, right? So if I click on this, and if I try to click on the mouse, so I'm clicking it right now, right? So the computer understands that because the mouse is pressed is not true. So if the condition comes true, tries to perform the statement, right? Now, if I move my mouse, it is still pressed, right? If I still press it, it can move, right? Very slowly, right? Because the background gray was drawn once, and now we are trying to draw the circle on top of it, right? Now, for example, just in case you want to see the other version, you can put it here, right? And I can just click on it, and then if I move it, like the circle doesn't like the previous circles that were created didn't stay, right? And they were disappeared. Cool. So there are also other type of inputs that we can talk about, like key health and like how this program understands like if you hold a particular key, like for example letter A or like a key A or G. I think we have to talk about it later because I think there are some maybe issues about this function. So we have like to first take care of that, and again we can talk about it at the end of this session or in the future sessions. So don't worry about it. Now we are going to talk about the loops. So loops are very important. If you remember, if you want like to do something again and again, and you want like to make it automatic, you can use loops, right? So for example, previously we talked about this, that if you have like a shopping list and like you want like to print them, you can just go through each item one by one and just do for item, whatever, print item, right? So print that item, right? So if you just copy it like in a separate cell, oops, sorry. If you just copy in a separate cell, you don't need that as a comment. I'm just trying to make it simple. Okay. So now if you print it, just print all the items one by one, right? So eggs, ham, cheese, onions, right? So that is cool. That is cool. But what if you have two lists, right? So for example, if you remember in the previous session or session before that, I'm not sure, that you have to create like 4 rectangles, right? And all of them were black, right? But with different like locations, right? So you use a list that contains the coordinates or the locations of these rectangles, and then use a for loop to go through them, right? But what if you want to use like a different color for them, right? So let's say you want like to use like a red, green, orange, and blue for them, right? So you have 2 different lists. You have not just like the list for the locations, but also a list for the colors. So how can we go through both of them? So one cool idea is that instead of going through each item, like for example here, you go through each item, right? You just go through eggs, huh? Instead, we can go through the index. So before I talked about this range, I'm going just to show it here to you what we mean by that. So let's say you have a list of locations, right? For example, in the previous one, for example, here, right? Oops, okay, so here. So you have, for example, let's say, I don't know, let's say y is, so let's call it list of y positions, right? So you can say it is 10, I don't know, 50, 40, 60, 70, right? So you have 4 locations or 4 positions for y, and then you have lists of colors. So you have, for example, red, green, orange, and blue. So instead of going through each item, because remember, if you go through item, like item by item, it prints the item, right? But instead of going through like 10, 50, 60, 70, or red, green, or whatever, you can go through the index. So if you go through the index, so index 0, then you can get access to both of these 10 and red, right? Do you remember that you can use the index, for example, 0. For example, index 0, right? Oop, what's happening? That's the difference, maybe. Perfect. So the list of the y position 0 is 10, right? So at index 0, it is 10. But at the same index 0, the list of colors is red, right? So instead of going through the item, if you go through the index 1 by 1, like 0, 1, 2, 3, then you can get access to those. But how can I go through those indexes? So this is how we do it in Python. So in Python, we have something that is called range, right? So the range creates some sort of a list of numbers that starts from 0 up to 9 exclusively, which means that you don't include the 9 itself, right? So the 9, so you can think of it as the length or the number of numbers in your list, right? So if you have 9, and if you count them, you have 9 of them. So the length is 9, but it starts from 0 up to 8, right? So this is like a cool way. So for example, let's try it here. So let's say for I in range 9, print I. So let's see what it shows. So it's just 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, right? So it basically goes through that some sort of range, right, of 9, which is from 0 to 8. And at each time, we set the temporary variable I to that, right? Again, you can use anything, right? And then print that. Okay, so let's see, for example, how it works. So let's try it here. This example, right? So for I in range is 3, print high. So let's see. For I in range 3, print high. Right? So it goes through the list, which is 0, 1, 2, right? Which is just the length of that list, 3, right? And each time it prints high, right? So usually we use I for the index, or if you already use I, and you have like 2 for loops, or you have like another for loop, or you have some other variable, you have to use J or K, right? But these are some sort of like more advanced things. But for now, let's say we are only using I if you have only 1 for loop, right? So sometimes you have 4 loops, 2 for loops. So I'm not going to talk about that. Just going to show you, just in case you see it in like in the future, like if you search something in Google and you decide, don't get panicked, right? Sometimes you have 2 for loops. right? We call it nested for loops. So in this case, I don't want to use I because I already use it. So I use like J or K. Perfect. Also, another like a small tip here is that you can use anything here, right? Because you don't have I. So this is just some sort of redundant here, right? So sometimes you may see, if you search something about like for Google, in Google, you may see something like this, right? So this is like when you don't need that, right? But this is just, again, I'm just saying that if you see that in the Google or something like that, if you search it, that is okay because you're not using that I, right? You can use anything. So sometimes they use an underscore because they don't want to use it. But if you want, like, for example, to print the I itself, like the variable, then you have to use I because you want just to use it, right? It is better to use I in this case. Okay, so let's see what else can we talk about. So I'm going to make it a slide, but there's something cool here. So let's say we have a list of numbers, 5, 32, 26, right? And you want to use a for loop to go through them, right? Again, one simple approach to print the numbers was using the item, right? To going through the item of that list one by one. So you can say for item in numbers, print item, right? But we are trying to understand how the index works here. So instead of going through the item, we are going through the indices. So for I range 3, so whenever you see range 3, you should keep that in mind that it actually some sort of a list that starts from 0 up to the 3 exclusively. So this is 1, 0, 1, 2, right? So in the beginning, I is 0. And the numbers at index 0 is 5. So let's see. So I is 0, it prints 5. Then in the next iteration, it means that after it finishes like this for the first time, goes through the for loop again, right? So goes through again that block, then I becomes 1 now, it prints 32, then I becomes 2, it prints 26. Okay. And after that, you are at the end of the range, right? Because the range was from 0 to 2. So as soon as you get to I2 and you print the statement, you are at the end of this block. You don't need to go to the next one because there is no next number, right? That's it. So you are just done looping. Okay. So let's see how it works here. So let's say I have the shopping list, or let's say you have a list of colors. This is good. So you have a list of colors, right? And then if you want like to do some sort of more practice here, you know that the length of the list is 4, right? So do you remember that we have the len as a length? So you can say the length of the list is 4. So let's say call it like k. So if you print k, oh, I have print here, right? So it is 4, right? So now you can say for I in range k, right? I'm just trying to make some sort of change here so you can see how you can play with all the stuff you learned before and then mix them together. So you can say, okay, so for I range k, you don't need to like use your mind to put 4 here because this k equal length of list of colors is actually get the length itself. So you can now try to print list of colors I here. So you're actually going through like the indices from 0, 1 to 3, right? And then you print it, right? Again, this part, this line is just to show you how you don't need to count the number of like the items in the list to find that number, right? You can just say 4 here. That is okay, right? But it's better just to use some sort of length here to make it automatic. Okay. So again, we talk about that. So we have 2 lists here, list of, for example, positions, list of colors, right? And then you want to go through them and print it. So for example, here, this is a different story, like a different example. So we have some sort of balls here, right? There's 40, 100, 180, 280. And if you look at this code here, you remember that the first 2 numbers were the XY coordinates. So in this example, for the sake of simplicity, we assume that like the x and y are the same, right? We should consider like the same value for the x coordinate and y coordinate of the circles, right? But you can change it if you like. But the idea is how we can go through both the list of the balls and the sizes together, assuming that if, for example, you consider 40 as the x coordinate for the ball, its corresponding size, which is actually like the diameter here, is the same one here, right? So they are in the same order, right? So you as a user know that, right? So you as a user know that you have two lists and the number of the items here corresponds to the number of items here. So you can just go through the indices from 0 to 3, because you have 0, 1, 2, 3, which is the range of 4. Then at each time you create the circles, right? So you create the circles with for example, here for the first one, at 40 and 40 as xy with the diameter 12. Okay. So we're going to have a quick question one, and Pooja is going to create a poll for you to answer it. So we have two lists and we have result 0. We go through these indices of from like 0 to range 3. And what is the final result? So take your time and then try to understand how the computer actually sees this code.
I'll close it in about 20 seconds.
Okay, perfect. So we have some answers here. We have 9, 6, and 1, 3, 2, 0, 1, 2. So just a quick tip here for those who chose like the last option. This works if you have the print, right, inside the for loop. So I'm not sure if like the numbers will be correct, but if you have, I'm just saying that if you have multiple numbers here, 1, 3, 2, 0, 1, 2, that means your print statement, right, executed several times. But that is not the case here. So pay attention here that if you have the for loop, you update the result, right? But it is really important to notice the indent here. For the result in the for loop body, right here, I'm going to see if I can. Okay, I cannot show it here, but I can write it here for you. Let me show it here to you. So if you have for I range 3, right? And then you see whenever I enter, there is an indent, which means that you are now in the body of the for loop. So whatever you are doing here is considered as like something that should be executed inside the for loop, right? So you are trying to update the result here. Okay. And now if I say print result in the body, that makes sense. Then you might have several numbers, right? But if I remove the indent, the computer knows that after this for loop, if this next line doesn't have the same indent, and actually like the indent is actually like knowing in the beginning of the line, that means you are at the end of the for loop, right? You are finished, and now this is like a new line. So the print and result is actually going to be executed once. And what's happening here is that you are basically updating the result by the numbers of the list 1 and list 2, right? So what's happening here is that you're just going through like the numbers at index 0, 1, 2, one by one, and you are adding into the result, which was 0 in the beginning. So the final would be just a summation of all numbers, right? Because you have both lists. So for example, at index 0, you have 1. The result becomes 1 in this line. Then for the same index 0, I is still 0, right? So I is still 0. Then for the next line, you just add the result to the first number of the list 2, which is 0. So you have 1, 0, and 1, so it becomes 1 here, for example. The index 1 and 2, and so on. So the answer would be 1 and 1, 2, 2 and 3, 5, 5 and 2, 4, 7, 7 and 2, 9. That's it. By the way, feel free to, if you still need to understand what's going on, you can try it at home. You can try, for example, try to put print here, print like result, right? And then you can say result, right? And then you can say print, I don't know, like next result, just to make sure that like you understand what's happening here. And if you want, like, for example, to make sure that you understand what's like how iteration goes, you can create a line like this. Then you can create like the I as well. What is the iteration here, right? This can give you an idea what's happening here. So for example, let me try something here. So let's say you I 1, 2, 3. This is just a simple example to show you how it goes. So 2, 3, 4. Then if you just print it, okay, I have to, it says name result is not defined, of course, because I didn't define it. So I have to define it first, right? Because don't forget that here, this means this, right? Which means when you get to this line, the computer should already know what the result is. So that's why you get this error here. So I'm going to just bring it back here. So now you see it's really a good visualization here. So you can see it's I0, result is 1, then the next result becomes 3, then the next result becomes like the result of the next iteration for I1 becomes 5, 8. So if you get some sort of weird loop in the future, you can try to understand what's happening with the printf statement. So let's move on. So that is like actually like what we talked about before. So you can use the length of the list, right, and the range together, right, to go through. So you don't need to count them one by one. So for example, here, the exposition is 20, 105, 6, 60. The length is 4. Of course, you can count them and just put any call for yourself, right? But it's better to make it automatic. Why? Because if you want to change the expose again, let's say you want to create 5 rectangles, right? So you don't need to change the 4 as well. Because if you change it to 5 items, the n becomes 5. And then it goes through all the items because now it is n is 5 now. Right? So this is the same concept that we talked about before. So back to our example, if you remember, we have like the colors, the white list, and now here you see 4, but you don't have to create this 4, right? So you can create, for example, if you have these 2 here, right? You can create like the n and length of one of them, right? It doesn't matter. As long as you know that they have the same length, right? And then you can go, okay, for I in range n, then you can do something, right? Do something, right? Do something, whatever, right? So you can see, you can create like the rectangle or circle, whatever. But the idea here is that you want like to go through both of them, and you don't want to create like, you don't want to like to manually count them. You just want to use length and then go through them. Perfect. So we are going to have it as 1. We are going to send you to the breakout room. So you're going to create 3 circles with the list and follow. So enjoy. back. I'm going just to share my screen here. Yeah, I'm trying to do it on my own. I was not successful, right? So if you couldn't do it, right, that is okay. So I try like to use like the input key held for the bonus part, but I couldn't. So I tried to use like another technique. I'm going to share it with you guys, but it didn't work for me. So maybe you can figure out why. But I will talk about that. So just talk about like the simplest stuff first. So you have 3 circles. So they are at different coordinates, right? So you can create X list and Y list. The idea here is that you can change the list you like, right? You can do, for example, for, I don't know, like 4 numbers, right? If you want like four circles, right? So that is like the idea of using like the XX and the Y list here. Then you can just go through. So forget about this slide because this is just my part. So I'm going just to comment this one and comment this one. So you do not get confused by this one. It's just my thing here. So, and also the offset part, let's say we don't want to move them in the beginning, right? So this part is actually the thing that I add myself, but I will talk about that later. So, so you have like the 3 coordinates, x, y. So you have x is corresponding y, x is corresponding y, and x is corresponding y. So again, the idea was to go through each index and get access to those through the index, right? So you can either use n here, right? Go through the n as the number of indices. But if you don't plan to use n again, right? Let's say later, it is better to remove it and just put the whole thing here. It makes it cleaner, right? I mean, that of course, if you need to use this number of circles later, so let's say someone asks you print, for example, the number of circles and do some other stuff, right? Yes, in that case, it is better to first assign it to a variable. So I call it, for example, n, and then use it. But in this case, you don't have to, right? So, right? And then you create like the circle with the x list and y. So these are just x and y. So these are just matter. The idea was to using the list and the for loop. So you can just ignore the other parts. And let me put it here. Yeah, you don't need this, you don't need this, you don't need this. That's it. So it just create like this very simple circles for you guys with no eyes. So something like this, right? But of course you can just become like more creative, create some eyes for it. I will for now skip this part just in case if we have like to cover other slides. But if I get some time, I will go back to this part and say what I'm doing here, what was the reason I do this. But by the way, it doesn't work completely. So it has some issues I couldn't figure it out, but feel free to watch the video and then go through this and see what's happening here. So that was just for moving the circles, because in my computer, this input here that I talked about, and I skipped myself, the key here that can understand like if you press a Q or not, didn't work. So we'll talk about these 2 slides later in the future, okay? So don't worry about that. So, okay. So far, we talked about the for loop, which was basically you give it some sort of numbers or items, go through like the loop, like the list, and you know that it is like somehow it is clear in advance that how many items you're going to like how many times you're going to iterate, right? But sometimes you may maybe you don't have like any information at us, right? Maybe you want like to something occurs again and again until like a condition becomes false or true or vice versa, right? this is actually where the while loop comes in. So as you can see, sometimes you can use them interchangeably. So you can use for loop instead of while loop or vice versa. It is usually better to use for loop because of the reason that we're going to see shortly. But sometimes it is hard to listen. So sometimes you are better off just go with the while loop if you don't know how many iterations you are going to do. So let's dig into this. Right? So let's say, for example, you have some sort of like food, right? Let's say someone like gives you food, you don't know like how much it is, you don't know like when it's going to finish, you just start like eating it, right? And then you never stop, right? You stop, for example, whenever like the food finish, right? Or whenever like you feel like you're not hungry anymore, right? So this is similar to the concept behind the while loop. So we are going to do something again and again until something becomes false, or some condition that we create for the while loop becomes false. So now you can see that the while loop has like what condition, like it's similar to if, but it's not if, because it's just one time, right? The while is similar to for loop, so it iterates. So it is like something going on and on, but also it needs a condition to understand when it has to stop, right? So let's say, for example, we have something like this. So let's say you have the I equals 0, right? And now let's say you want like to a simple loop, right? That counts to 10, right? Of course, here it is really simple that you know in advance, like it is 10, right? So you can say, for example, for I in range 10, print I, right? I'm going to write it down on the right side of the screen right now, right? So if you, for example, print it, you start from 0 and then go to 9, right? But this is just a simple example to show you how the while loop works, right? But sometimes you don't know this number 10, so it is better to use while loop. So here, this is just a simple example to show you and to help you understand how the while loop works. So let's say I have I0 and then while I not 10, right? Why I0? It doesn't matter, right? You can use I2, right? Or I3, right? You cannot say I don't have anything, right? You cannot say, for example, let's say I use, for example, Q, right? Here, just to use like a different letter. That's it. So, for example, I cannot use Q print Q plus 1 because what kind of error am I going to get? That the Q hasn't been defined, right? Because you didn't define Q. So of course, it says neon Q is not defined, right? So you have to create it to define Q, and of course, like it is like some sort of like a starting point or initialization. So you can initialize it with 0 or 2 or whatever. So let's say you want to start not from 0. Let's say you want to start from number 3, right? In this case, I'm going just to make it different a little bit. So let's say you want to start from 3 and count it up to 10, right? And then you want to stop. So what's happening here is that you print Q, right? Then it's again, you have indent, which means that you are in the body of the while loop, right? So this code is going, like this line of code, the statement is going to run, right? Before like going back to the beginning of the while loop. So now the Q becomes 4, right? The Q is 4. 4 is still, this is a condition, right? 4 is still not 10. So now it goes to the body again, right? So this is the condition that the while loop check every time that you change Q or you have a Q, right? Every time that you want to run the block of the code, the while loop should check the Q, right? So you add Q, you add 1 to the Q again and again. At some point, you get to 9. 9 is still not 10, so it's okay. So it printed, but then 9 becomes 10. Then it goes to this part that check the condition and becomes false, and it stops. So let's see. Right? So it starts from 3 because that was 3. You print it, right? So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then at some point it is stopped, right? So it is a good idea that if you are working with while loop, it is a good idea to ask yourself when this while loop is going to stop, right? You have to keep that in mind that if you just do it like without any, let's say, like some sort of like double checking your mind, it is possible that you run it for infinite times. So I'm going to show it here. I'm not going to show it here because the system might crash, but you can definitely do it later on your own, probably. I don't know. I think that you can do it on your own. But let's just a simple example. So let's say I have like the same thing here, but let's say I comment this, right? Or remove this, like comment means removing, right? So you just remove it. What's happening here is that you have Q equals 3, right? The condition is true because Q is not 10. You print it and you don't change it, right? So you don't do anything, but that is okay. It doesn't mean that your program doesn't run. It runs. But the problem here is that the Q is again 3 here. When it comes back to the beginning of the while loop, the condition is still true. So it's printed again and again and again. So it doesn't stop. You have, like, as a user, you have to stop. So that's why if you are running, for example, software, then you have to make sure that you know when the while loop is going to stop, because if it doesn't, there is a high chance that your software crashes. Right? So we're going to have a quick question here. So this is just another while loop, right? So we want to add one of these 4 options to this while loop, right, to avoid creating an infinite loop. So whenever you do something, you have to check that in your mind, that, well, how does the I change, because I is in the condition, right? And then that can help you to understand whether the while loop stops or not.
I'll give it around 20 more seconds. All right, I close it.
Okay, so let's go through this example and see what's happening here. So again, as I said before, it is a good idea to put yourself in a computer's shoes, right? And see how the computer sees the code, right? So for example, if I'm a computer, if I want like to see the code, this is like how I see it. I say that, okay, I0, cool. So I go to the next line. So I0 not equal to -10. So it's true, right? So I go to the next line. The next line is indent, has indent. So I know that it is inside the while loop body. So it's like it is in the while loop block, right? So it has to be run inside the while loop. So I print I. Now let's try, for example, A. If I update I by adding 1 to it, I'm actually increasing I, right? So the 0 becomes 1, 2, 3, 4. It's always positive. So there is no way that I can be -10 in the future, right? After some like number of iterations, right? So I know that there is no way that the program stops if you choose option A here for this line, the blank line here. So what about the option B? So I is -3. So there is a chance here that I can get to -10, but let's see. So if I have 0, Then I subtract 3 from it. So it becomes 0, -3, -6, -9, which is not -10. And then I jump. Then after that, I don't meet -10. After -9, -9 minus -3, because that's the next iteration, right? It becomes -12. So again, I missed this condition, and there is no way that I can get back, like I can come back and say that, hey, in the future I will be equal to -10. So that doesn't work. But what about option C here? So I'm decreasing I, but with 5 units, not with 3 units. Now you can see that if it is 0, it becomes -5. Then it becomes -10, right? So as soon as you get to -10, you meet, like, you know that like this condition becomes false, so the while loop stops. So you can do it. And again, I'm going just to try option C here. So print I, and then I, oops, -5. Whoa, what's happening here? It says okay here, right? Oh, okay. My bad. Okay. What's happening here? Okay, I'm losing my mind. Okay, that was like a typo in the print. So that was like 0, and then you have -5, and that's it. You're going to stop. Right? So don't forget that as soon as you get to -10, your program stops here, right? It doesn't go inside the value. So the next line after this is going to be this line here. For example, let's say I have done, right? So 0, -5, and then after that, you are done with the while loop block, and that's it. This is not indented, right? So this is just out of the while loop, and then it's going to print this one. Okay, so now we want us to see see the comparison between like the for loop and the while loop that we we say just now, right? So the for loop is, as you said before, like it repeated, right, as many times as you tell it, right? So you know in advance, like how many times it's going to repeat or iterates, right? But sometimes you have no idea when it's going to stop, or sometimes it is hard, like to calculate it, right? So it is better, for example, to use while loop, right, in those cases. And sometimes you can use both of them, as I said before, interchangeably. So you can use one of them instead of the other, or vice versa. So this is just a cool thing here. So for example, you have like this idea that like the value of x is 50, which is just the x coordinates of the circle, right? The y is fixed, so you can see like it is at the horizontal level, right? So it is at horizontal level, which means that all the circles have the same y coordinates. They have the same size, so you don't need to worry about that. So we use the same diameter, like 10 here. But let's say you want to increase x again and again, right? So you're increasing x, but at some point, for example, it reaches like where your mouse is, right? So it's going to stop. Let's try it. I never tried before, so I hope that it works, but let's see. I'm going to do it here. 50. I'm going to do it here, x is 50. I make it global. And I have to use indent. I mean, you don't have to use tab here. I mean, that if you just write it yourself, and then you just, let's say you are here, and then say you have x colon, right? And then if you hit enter, it creates like the indent automatically. So don't worry about that. But if you don't see any indent, if you copy it from somewhere, you have to create it yourself, right? So be careful. So this is global x. And then I have, let's say, background, I don't know, let's say orange, right? Whatever, doesn't matter. So I have 300 and 300 should be fine. If it's 300, I prefer to use 150 because that's just the middle of my screen. And let's see if it works. So you see, as I changed, I mean, of course, I didn't create any condition to remove the circle that I created before. So if I go to the left, it doesn't remove them, right? But you can see that it increases like the number of circles as I move my mouse to the right. So let's try it one more time. So let's say I'm trying to start from here, right? So it tries like to add X. So for example, you see it doesn't create anything here, right? And anything here. Because if you add, for example, if I put my mouse here, and if I don't know the value of course, mouse of X or X here, right? But the thing here is that if you put, for example, your cursor here right now, like as I'm doing it right now, and the X is the value of the X is not smaller than the mouse of X, like the updated value of the X, right? Because you're updating it X, but adding 2 to it. So the X is now some number which is apparently bigger than my cursor. So as soon as my cursor goes to the right and I increases the value of the mouse X, the condition becomes true, right? Okay, sounds good. Okay, cool. Perfect. So a similar idea, but this is just a rectangle, and you just have to do it like vertically. Like as you do it vertically, you just increase like the length as well. So we're going to send you to the breakout room and have fun. Okay, I think we're almost done. Yeah, we have, I think 30 ahead is here. Okay, I'm going just to share my screen. I hope everyone is back already. Perfect. So the example, like the exercise, like the same as like the thing that I did before, like the exercise, but this time instead of like a circle, you have rectangle and you're moving downwards, right? So you are changing, so you're moving downwards, but the starting is the same. So you have to use the same X, right? So you can use 0 or 10 or whatever, right, at the XY, right? But the thing here is that you want like to choose a different, like you want like to go through like iterate through the value of Y and increase it, because as you move down, don't forget that in this program for the draw function here, whatever you are doing, the window that you created here is size is Y is going down, right? So the X goes from left to right, Y goes from top to bottom. So as you move from top to bottom, you want to increase your Y. So after that, we're trying to increase our Y. So let's see, this would work, right? And that's it. Let's see if we have, okay. So now we want to talk about the random numbers. So random numbers is important in terms of like sometimes you need to create some sort of random numbers to do something. So it has a lot of like how do you call it? Like applications, right? So if, for example, you want like to do create some sort of like algorithms that is some sort of like random initialization, right? So you can use random numbers, right? Or let's say you are trying just to see, for example, try to simulate, like, for example, tossing a dice, right? So you can create some sort of random numbers, right? And let's see how it works. Okay. Right? So there's a simple function, and we call it random. That's it, right? So it creates like a random number between 0 and 1, right? So let's see. We have, let's say 10 here, right? Okay, I think I have to create Python. I think maybe we have to do it here. Maybe it is already imported, because I think we have to import maybe random here. I'm going to do it here, just in case if something can change. So let's print. So let's do it first n equal random. And let's print it. I think it should work. Let's see. Okay, okay, because it's like it's repeats again and again, so that's why we see this. So let's put it here to just skip that problem. I think it should work now. Yeah, so we just create one number again. So because the draw function actually, this part here is actually repeats again and again, so that's why you see that then like a lot of numbers going on and on that you have to click stop, right? Again, this pass here, you don't need to worry about that, but whenever like you want to use like the define like the definition like function draw, and then you don't want to write anything at that time, or you don't have any idea, you can just do pass, right? That should be fine. So we talk about this random, right? But if I choose, for example, 100, right? Random expected 0 arguments. Oh, okay, I see. So I forgot about that. So the random actually doesn't get an argument here. So that was my bad. So I didn't know that. So I thought that like it creates like any value between 0 and that number, but apparently it just only creates like a random value between 0 and 1. But let's say you want like to create like the random number between 0 and 10, then you can use rand int here, right? And this is not just the random number, any random number between 0 and this is not just any decimal number between 0 and 1. So this is just an integer number. So for example, if you use, I don't know, 100, it is an integer number between 0 and that number. So I think we are good here. Let's see. What example do we have here? So this is just another example that, let's say you want to create some sort of circles, right? But you don't want to create like a fixed size circle. You want like the size of the circle change, right? And you don't want to pick it yourself. You want just to create some random numbers, like to create some arcs, right? So this is how it works. So for example, you can say, I'm doing here. So you can say, for example, if mouse is pressed, right? Again, okay, this is the stop set of things. I have to do it here. There's draw. And before that, I'm going to create a background blue. This is almost blue, but not blue, but it doesn't matter. So we create the background here, because don't forget that if you wanted to create the same example here, you have to put the background here, because if you put the background in draw, it's going to plot it on top of the previous one. So if mouse pressed, you create a diameter, which is completely random, right? So rand int between 0 and 50, right? So it creates a random number between 0 and 50. But do I have to choose 25 here? No. I mean, that you can, of course, do it, right? Sometimes it creates a small number. But let's say you want, for example, the minimum size of the circle that you want to plot is at least 10, right? For example. So you can say 10 plus my rand int, right? So you know that even if your rand int function, this one here, gives 0, right? At least your diameter would be 10. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's it. So I'm going to create a circle here, and mouse X, mouse Y, which is basically just the position of the mouse, right? As I said before, this is already defined, so don't worry about this one. So it's not like the previous errors that we got that this variable is not defined. So it is already defined, and this should work. So let me erase this one, and It's interesting. I'm getting the same circle. Oh no, the size is going to change. Yeah, that makes sense now. Okay, and that's it. So let's see if you have anything more to say. That's it, I think, guys. So we're going to send you to the breakout room to do the exercise random now. Feedback busters. Oh, you don't have any exercise, Pooja?
Yep, they're right there. Bug busters and Pythonic level.
Oh, okay.
All right, I'm going to open the rooms. Just want to make a quick announcement on these exercises. So some of them use the keys held function, which we skipped over today just because it's not working on the platform at the moment. So we will extend the deadline a little bit, and we'll send an announcement in our Discord once that functionality is fixed. So just be aware of that. I'll open all the rooms.
Finish like the session with you guys. So one of the students asked in the chat that, for example, my code is not running because like it says error expected and indented block. So I'm just going to show you one thing and then give you just a quick tip here. So let's say you have this thing here, right? This while loop. Let's say then you put something like this, right? To a space, right? So this shouldn't work. Right? This is unexpected indent, right? Which means that they're not in the same indent. So whenever you are in the body of like a for loop, you cannot create the indent yourself, right? They have the same indent unless you want to create a new loop or new block. So for example, if you want like to create like a new block of for loop, right? For example, here, then you are allowed to, then you have to actually, then you have to create like a new block, a new indent. So if you hit enter, you can see that it creates the indent itself, right? So you write something, and then when you like remove the indent, now this line is aligned with this line, right? Which means that there is no indent compared to this sharp sign, this lines here, which means that this is outside of this for loop, but this line is aligned with, for example, this print, which means that these two are inside this while. So whenever you are trying to practice, if you are like a beginner, it might be a good idea to try new things. For example, what if I remove the column here, right? Does it work, right? So you can see it says invalid syntax, right? And show you here. So this is a good idea to read the error and understand what the error says. And that's it. So I think that we are good to go. I have to go. I think Pooja is going to create a poll for you. I'm going to see you next week. If you have any questions, let us know on Discord. Bye, everyone.